So you might recall the massive amount of police brutality against protesters over the past month and a half or so. A lot of people, maybe even watching this, might have been exposed to some of the lowlights of that sort of police brutality thanks to the work of Jordan, who's on the show with us now, who's done some great montages of this brutality. Well, one of the incidents that I believe was in your first montage was cops in New York seemingly stopped by a group of protesters in their police SUV, deciding, you know what, we're not waiting, we're just going to barrel forward into these mass protesters. So the NYPD commissioner was asked about this incident by the New York AG, and take a look at what he had to say about it.
Where you saw two police cars basically drive into a crowd of protesters. I believe it was on Flatbush Avenue. Are you familiar with that incident?
I am intimately familiar with that incident.
And was that in violation of your use of force policy?
No. That our Internal Affairs Bureau investigated this information, and preliminarily, we have an accounting of that incident where we have officers in a situation where they're essentially being penned in by protesters. I think that's plainly evident if you review all of the facts. It's on the heels of several other incidents where that same tactic was used, also caught on video and available for anyone to see, where people are penning in police vehicles and then pelting it with a number of items, including bricks, including garbage cans, and trying to assault the officers. So
But in
that was the incident in which you are referring to.
So, Jordan, before we jump in, just in case people aren't familiar with exactly the incident we're talking about, you all just heard how the commissioner described it, that they were penned in, they were being assaulted, they had to do what they did, so it wasn't a use of force. Okay, with that, let's take a look at what the actual video was. So, you saw it. I mean, obviously, Jordan, you're familiar with this video. So what do you think about the commissioner's description of what happened?
I mean, NYPD saw this clip and said, oh, we investigated ourselves and we found no wrongdoing. I mean, that's a perfect, succinct example of the problem. Like, you can't have a weaponized militaristic force tasked with protecting and serving the populace, and the only accountability measure is an internal investigation. Mm-hmm. That's just you're setting the stage for rampant corruption, and as it manifests here, it's violence against people, protesters. I mean, you have a right to protest freely and peacefully, and you're like, mm-hmm. It's not unreasonable to expect people would throw something at a car that's driving into a crowd of people. I mean, mm-hmm. It's a totally understandable reaction. So for NYPD, I don't know. This is just par for the course of the NYPD. We've seen clip after clip after clip of rampant abuse, of grotesque violence from NYPD. They've shown no remorse. They've shown mm-hmm. no accountability, and they're fighting off any type of oversight.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm happy that they're even being asked about it at all, because it seems like a lot of, like, so much of it they just got away with. Like, the videos went around, people got outraged, it generated more protest, yes, and occasionally consequences. A cop put on, temporarily paid leave or something like that. A few were fired, but considering the severity of the violence we saw, how widespread it was across so many cities, the vast majority of them just got away with it. And that video right there, the commissioner was like, they were penned in, being assaulted with bricks and all of that, so they had to do it. Another car came up from behind them. Presumably the road was at least relatively open, unless you're asserting that car had just cut through another crowd. They could have backed up. they could have not moved. Does anyone believe that if they hadn't gunned the engine there, the next thing that would have happened was that the cops would have been killed? Does anyone think that? No, but he thinks that what they did was actually better. They were being horrendously assaulted, so they just did what they had to do. No, first of all, I didn't see a single brick. Yeah, there was garbage being thrown. I saw a police cone being thrown. The cops were in no danger. Those people were in danger from the violence of the cops. And with all the power that we give the police, are we not allowed to expect them to utilize a little bit more restraint, a little bit more responsibility, that maybe you can just chill for a little bit rather than risking killing people? Apparently no one was horribly injured, which to me is amazing. I'm shocked that they weren't. I mean, I think most people focus on the car that was up against the barricades, but the other car that comes through is just hitting people, and thankfully none of them tripped. If they had, they could have been killed.
Yeah, and this wasn't even the only instance of NYPD hitting people with their cars. There was another clip that NYPD there's several cars driving down the street. One of them opened their door and deliberately hit somebody as they passed him. Does that violate the protocol?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and here's the thing. Like, of course, these things, we all know, any rational person watching that clip knows that is excessive force. That's an abuse of power. But because of the way the police and the police unions operate, like, there's not going to be any accountability because, it's tasked with like internal investigations and there's all of this red tape because of the police union contracts to stop and prevent any outside oversight. So, like, the heart of this issue is police unions and how they are the ultimate roadblock to progress on this front. So I would encourage people to read up on, like, there's multiple different resources. I can't name them all, but there's so many different compendiums and resources that break down each police department's union contract and what that does specifically in accountability, like how police unions get multiple days when there's incidents like this to get their story straight before they come out and respond to allegations or incident reports. Like, there's so many different measures. That's just one that they use, and these tactics that they employ to prevent any type of consequences from ever impacting their department after incidents like this.
Yeah, and like, if I hesitate to ask this question because I'm worried how some people will respond, but if a bunch of people go in front of my car, am I allowed to run them over? Apparently, if you're penned in, if you're scared, you get to. Of course, the issue is that a significant number of conservatives do believe that if protesters pen you and you should be able to kill them, you or the cops. I think that's madness. Are you being inconvenienced? Sure. Is that frustrating? Sure. Do you get to kill someone as a result? I would say no. I really hope not.
Right.
And I guess in this case, it's not even a few bad apples. Like, those apples weren't bad, is the NYPD's point of view. That commissioner is saying to all of their officers, if you find yourself in a situation like this, literally the most dangerous thing that I can imagine you doing is acceptable, as long as you feel inconvenienced, as long as there's, you're really going to go into reverse. I mean, come on, that would take extra time. But one extra comment I want to read came a little bit later on when Letitia James asked, so in that particular instance, is it your testimony that the police car was an appropriate use of force? And take a look at this answer. I'm not saying that the police car was used as a use of force. The officers were set upon and attacked, and thankfully they were able to get out of that situation with, to my knowledge, no injuries to anyone. So doesn't even admit that it's not that it's that it's excessive force. It's not force at all. That is nothing to me. Like, it's Westworldian. Like, I'm looking at the video, and that's not brutality. It's not that it's acceptable brutality, it's not even brutality. They're refusing to even admit that this is a dangerous thing that the cops were doing.
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of response you're going to get from like I said, a militaristic, weaponized force who's been trained to shoot first and ask questions later, with no outside accountability.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, any admission on that front would just open the door to more inroads, in inquisitions and examinations of their practices and scrutiny of their behavior. So, of course, they're going to say that nothing happened because what are we going to do? because of the power that they have and the leverage that they have through the police union and like the control they have over the government, like there's nothing you can do in response. So that's why we need to have a serious discussion around defunding and abolishing the police, reallocating those resources to other things, like social workers, like licensed therapists, counselors, all of these different types of professions and specialists for people who can respond to situations, who have expertise in that area, not just someone showing up with a gun.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Not just someone with a gun who seems to have been handpicked from amongst the most scared people in America. Like, we choose the most constantly terrified people and then arm them and say, if you get scared, you can do literally anything you want. So Cyrus Silly, to some it says in Super Chat, when used against police, cars are lethal weapons. Yeah, exactly. If a bunch of police penned in your car, you think you're allowed to run them over? I have a feeling they might consider that a real threat. But it also makes me remember the classic thing that happened. I forget which protest. It might have been in San Diego. But it was when a protester, the cops launched tear gas canisters at them, and a protester picked one up and threw it back, and they charged the protester with assault with a deadly weapon. That's amazing. That is
incredible.
So you almost got to respect that, but you don't. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.